Jenner's son, according to his biographer named John Barron, got erysipelas from the first of two smallpox inoculation challenges, the first being in 1791. Erysipelas is a severe bacterial infection from Streptococcus. Hey moms, ever hear of pandas or pans? The S stands for Streptococcus. So if you go digging for evidence against vaccines, you simply have to go back to its beginning to know that pandas and pans was being polluted into the human race in the 1700s. Streptococcus is a bacteria, not virus as cowpox and smallpox are classified today. Therefore, the lesions of the swinepox, which is known today as a virus that does not cross-immunize against either cowpox or smallpox, was not even part of the disease presentation of his infant son, over and above Jenner harvesting unidentified, untested pus from a pig. Barron's biography went on to say, his eldest son Edward, who had a feeble constitution and other infirmities, which rendered it inexpedient to send him to public school, received all his education under his father's roof. I'll leave it up to the jury to decide if this was a result of the swinepox followed by two smallpox inoculations as being evidence of neurological damage falsely labeled today by the entrapment word autism. Edward Jr. died of tuberculosis in 1810 at the age of 21. It's ironic to note that the child's mental decline could have been the first recorded incident of autism from vaccination, or since vaca means cow, maybe pigination. Edgar March Crookshank's fame in bacteriology came from identifying tuberculosis in the milk supply in England. TB was an equal opportunity killer, but it begs the question of whether Jenner's child didn't get the TB as well from the inoculation. From this baseless foundation, Edward Jenner, on the 2nd of August, 1797, wrote, "The simple experiment of applying the matter from the heel of the horse in its proper state to the nipples of the cow, when they are in a proper state to be infected by it, is not so easily made as at first sight may be imagined. After waiting with impatience for months in my own neighborhood without effect, I sent a messenger to Bristol in vain to procure the true virus. I even procured a young horse, kept him constantly in the stable, and fed him with beans in order to make his heels swell, but to no purpose. By the time the pamphlet goes to a second edition, I hope to be able to give some decisive experiments." But no cowpox appeared in the dairies, and his researches were thus interrupted until the spring of 1798, when an outbreak occurred which afforded him the much wished-for opportunities for further observations. A mare, the property of a dairyman in a neighboring parish, began to have, quote, sore heels in the later part of February 1798. The horse's heels were dressed by the farm servants Thomas Virgo, William Warrett, and William Haynes, who in consequence contracted sores on their hands, followed by inflamed lymphatic glands in the arms and axilla, and constitutional symptoms, shiverings succeeded by heat, lassitude, and pains in the limbs. Haynes and Virgo had both previously been successfully inoculated with smallpox, but Warrett had not had smallpox. Haynes was daily employed as one of the milkers at the farm, and the disease began to shew itself among the cows about 10 days after he first assisted in washing the mare's heels. Their nipples became sore in the usual way, with bluish pustules, but as remedies were early applied, they did not ulcerate to any extent. The cowpox was raging in several dairies, but Jenner confined his attention to this one outbreak. Whether it was the only one in which there happened to be a horse with, quote, greasy heels, we are not told. Jenner's mind was occupied with the opportunity of making a double experiment, inoculation of one child with humanized horse grease and of another child with the matter from the cow's teats. With regard to the horse grease inoculation, Jenner says, this experiment was made to ascertain the progress and subsequent effects of the disease when thus propagated. The object of this experiment is thus clearly stated. Jenner had already condemned horse grease, for he had committed himself to the statement that it had been decisively proved that grease could not be relied upon as a protective agent against smallpox. The object of studying the progress and effects may have been a double one. First, to ascertain whether an attack of smallpox would follow. For Jenner was firmly of the opinion that the grease was the source of smallpox. It was after it was transmitted through the cow that it appeared in a modified form known as cowpox. This outbreak, therefore, afforded him the opportunity for testing his theories. He could inoculate one child with the matter of the grease and another with the matter of the cowpox, and the study of the results side by side. And if he could experimentally generate smallpox in the one case and carry on cowpox in the other, what an interesting addition to his paper it would prove. Secondly, he may have wished to ascertain whether by successive cultivation in the human subject, protective properties could be gradually assumed by the horse grease virus. For his experimental purposes, Jenner selected a child 5 years old, John Baker by name. And on March 16, 1798, he took matter from a pustule on the hand of Thomas Virgo, one of the servants who had been infected from the mare's heels. He became ill on the 6th day with symptoms similar to those excited by the cowpox matter. On the 8th day, he was free from indisposition. There was some variation in the appearance of the pustule on the arm, although it somewhat resembled a smallpox pustule, yet its similitude was not so conspicuous as when excited by matter from the nipple of the cow, or when the matter has passed from thence through the medium of the human subject. The result had little in common with inoculated smallpox, but it so far corresponded with inoculated cowpox that Jenner was encouraged to apply the variolous test to ascertain whether, in spite of his previous conclusions, the system had been rendered insusceptible of smallpox. We have seen that the virus from the horse, when it proves infectious to the human subject, is not to be relied upon as rendering the system secure from variolous infection, but the matter produced by it on the nipple of the cow is perfectly so. Whether its passing from the horse through the human constitution, as in the present instance, will produce a similar effect remains to be decided. Jenner, of course, intended to apply the test of the variolous inoculation and watch the results. Now, in the historical case of James Phipps, the cowpox was inoculated on the 14th of May. On the 10th day, he was said to be perfectly well. On the 1st of July following, that is to say, in less than 7 weeks after inoculation, he was inoculated with smallpox. We may therefore conclude that as John Baker had been inoculated on the 16th of March and was said to be free of indisposition 8 days afterwards, that it was Jenner's intention to inoculate him on or about the 1st of May. This would now have been effected, but the boy was rendered unfit for inoculation from having felt the effects of a contagious fever in a workhouse soon after this experiment was made. The question naturally arises whether the fever might not have been from the result of inoculation with horse grease. What was the meaning of, quote, contagious fever, and why this vagueness of expression? Jenner was well acquainted with measles, scarlet fever, ulcerous sore throat with spotted skin, erysipelas, swinepox, chickenpox, and other fevers. We are therefore left to suppose that it was some unrecognized form of, quote, fever from which the boy ultimately recovered. But as the variolous inoculation had been prevented at the time, the history of the fever was not worth tracing, although further details might have been given, for the inquiry was not published until June 21st. It is not until we read Jenner's further observations that our attention is again drawn to this matter. In a reference to this case, Jenner insists upon the, quote, similarity to the cowpox of the general constitutional symptoms which followed. And in a footnote we read, quote, the boy unfortunately died of a fever at a parish workhouse before I had an opportunity of observing what effects would have been produced by the matter of smallpox, unquote. The fact, then, of the boy's death was omitted in the first account. And this is the full meaning of the boy being, quote, rendered unfit for inoculation. But why should the fact of the boy's death have been omitted? Did the boy die from the effects of inoculation? Let us revert to the history of the case. What was the state of the progress of the vesicle on the boy's arm? No description is given in the inquiry. All that we learn is that the symptoms were similar to those excited by cowpox matter, and on the 8th day he was free from indisposition, and the pustule, quote, somewhat resembled a smallpox pustule, unquote. On referring to the colored illustration, it is hardly credible that the lad was free from indisposition on the 8th day. A vesicle is depicted with the appearances which indicate that the, quote, vaccination had taken severely. Other casual reference in further observations throws additional light on this case. Jenner says that he was led to assume the origin of the cowpox from the grease, partly from, quote, the progress and general appearance of the pustule on the arm of the boy inoculated with the matter taken from the hand of a man infected by a horse, unquote. Now, if it progressed in the same way as cowpox inoculation on Phipps, it must have been a vesicle surrounded by an efflorescence with, quote, rather more of an erysipelatous look than we commonly perceive when variolous matter has been made use of in the same manner, leaving on the inoculated parts scabs and subsequent eschars, unquote. The progress of this vesicle having been compared to that of inoculated cowpox, we may conclude that it ran on to ulceration, the bane of Jenner's early inoculations. This supposition is verified by an abstract published by Barron from Jenner's manuscript notes, which he alludes to, quote, the peculiar appearance of the pustule and its disposition to run into an ulcer in the arm of the boy who was inoculated with the matter taken from the hand of a man who received the infection from dressing a slight spontaneous sore on a horse's heel, unquote. It is evident that in the published account of this boy's case, Jenner had suppressed all details of the progression of the vesicle, the ulceration, and the erysipelas, as well as the fatal termination of the case, and he inserted instead, quote, on the 8th day he was free from all indisposition, but was rendered unfit for inoculation from having felt the effects of a contagious fever, unquote. It would seem most probable that in this boy, 5 years old, selected by Jenner as a suitable subject for testing his speculations as to the progress and effects of horse grease, a large vesicle was produced which ran on to ulceration, that the angry blush developed into erysipelas, and the boy died. But his death was attributed to a contagious fever caught in the workhouse. In order to prove his assumption that the evolution of smallpox came from greasy heels in horses, he took unknown pus from a man's hand that had dressed a diseased horse and then lanced this cross-special passage allograft into John Baker, who died. More properly said, was killed by Edward Jenner in a medical experiment that would have been forbidden by the Geneva Conventions today. Murder has no statute of limitations. When Jenner tried to promote his idea to the Royal Society, his original draft of his inquiry was rejected. Jenner had to publish it himself, but the hint was taken that he had to remove the reference from the first edition that John Baker had died for the sins of the world and replaced it with was rendered unfit for inoculation. Because he was dead.